So the story I'm going to read to you today is from the biography of a formerly enslaved man named Harry Smith. And Harry Smith was enslaved for a long time, about 50 years, and he accumulated a lot of stories over the course of his life. And he told those stories in his biography. And so we're going to read one of those today about a man named Jim, who Harry described as the most powerful man in all of Kentucky. A sketch of Jim Hayden, a Guyana Negro who was the most powerful man, either white or black, that ever was known in the state of Kentucky. He belonged to a planter named Ned Hayden, who lived near Louisville. Massa Ned Hayden was a bachelor and was a man who treated his Negroes well. He finally married a desperate character whose name was Old Kit Queen. She owned a number of Negroes. Her brother owned a Negro pen in Bardstown, Kentucky. She was noted for her cruelty to the Negroes, and many times she would go into the pen where the Negroes were placed preparatory to going south. And while some were crying for having to leave perhaps a wife or a mother behind, never to see again, she would whip and slash them with the greatest enjoyment. No woman in the South was known to be as cruel as Old Kit. Before she married old Jim Hayden, she was her own overseer, riding around among her Negroes with revolvers at her side and a bullwhip, with all the audacity of the most cruel man. And for the least offense, she would order a colored man or woman tied and shirt taken off, and stand and whip them with great delight to herself. The cruelty this woman has alone inflicted on slaves would, if all known and written up, make a large book. After she married old Ned Hayden, she commenced her abuse on the darkies and tried her cruelty on them, and in order to follow out her hellish design, would report old Ned something false. This Jim Hayden, the subject of this sketch, had been one of his master's first slaves and was a very useful one, he being so strong. In clearing land, no two men could be found that could do the work he could. Old Kit took a dislike to him because she could not tie and whip him, and he never was, as they could not get enough men to do it unless they shot him. Kit managed to provoke Jim one day and sprang at him, revolvers in hand. Failing to scare him, she made a complaint to her husband, who informed her that he never had any trouble with Jim, and he was very useful on the plantation. When a number of Negroes would get to fighting, Jim was called and quickly dispersed the mob. Old Kit determined on managing some way to sell Jim to go away south, and after various schemes, finding Jim asleep one day, sent her brothers who ran the Negro pen, and they bound him and put him in the pen where he remained nearly a year. We will remark here, when Jim got asleep, it was most impossible to wake him, and this was the way she accomplished her hellish design. After Jim had been in the pen nearly a year, the jailer getting careless and coming a little too near for safety, it being nearly time for the Negro buyers to come up from the south, Jim determined to make his escape. So knocking the jailer senseless, Jim, with shackles on his feet, walked out and started on his way home. Some 2 hours elapsed before the jailer regained consciousness, and when he came to himself, he rallied a force of men and took after him. They followed him into a ravine, where he commenced throwing rocks with such force that for fear of being killed or perhaps having a horse's leg broken, they departed, leaving him master of the situation. With shackles on his feet, Jim passed on to where Uncle Thomas, an old preacher, lived, and finding a sharp axe, cut the irons off his feet and came home, and was there nearly 3 years before Old Kit found him asleep again, determined still to ruin him. Finally finding him asleep again, as usual, sent for her brothers who were notorious men, and after deceiving and lying to her husband, succeeded in binding him. Not thinking it best to put him in the pen again, sent him as fast as possible away south. On arriving there, Jim was taken out in a field where there were over 100 Negroes at work, and was ordered by the overseer to lay down and receive 40 lashes as an introduction to his slaves. Jim informed him he did not deserve any such treatment. The overseer then ordered the Negroes to seize him, determined to whip him anyway. He knocked down over 50 men, and the rest refused to advance. He walked a little distance, and while getting over the fence, the overseer shot at him, the ball passing through his left side. Jim sprang off the fence and, pulling up a canebrake, something no man was ever known to do before, sprang toward the overseer, the Negroes trying to protect their master as he dared not shoot for fear of killing some of the Negroes. Jim pressed on. Before reaching the overseer, he had killed 7 men, and coming up to the overseer, he beat his brains out and beat the ground where they lay. The Negroes, seeing the overseer and 7 of their own number dead, all ran for their life and told the news. As soon as possible, a large force of white men, fiends in the proper sense, came back, and he stood there and did not offer to get away. They surrounded him and riddled him with bullets, and then cut his heart out and placed it on a high pole in the field, and his body was given to the hogs to devour. Thus was murdered a Negro who had done more hard work in Kentucky than any man known.